as you've already realized, I may not need the microphone, but as you've already realized, Jussi's not shy. His English is also exceptional, and I was given to believe from the publisher saying, well, we'd really like you to help Jussi when it comes and maybe do a little Q&A to ease everything and read a little bit of the book because he's not terribly comfortable reading in English yet. I've just had one of the most intelligent conversations I've had with a human being in 6 weeks. And I'm sitting here thinking, what were you so terrified of? So I am going to read a little bit of the book, but first of all, in getting prepared for this role, which I now realize is largely superfluous, the bio was fascinating. First of all, Jussi grew up, his father was a psychologist and a sexologist.
He was a psychiatrist.
A psychiatrist.
That's
okay.
a difference.
Okay, yes. And however, you've already brought up the fact that the family moved from psychiatric hospital to psychiatric hospital throughout his childhood.
That's why.
And if that's not, yes, exactly, I'm going to say, if that isn't going to create a writer, nothing will. Right? And then in the 60s, he was lead guitarist in 2 bands, Milkshake Buffer Band, one of my favorite titles, and Dirty Drummer Trousers. And if that doesn't take you back, nothing will, okay? So, but then he went on, studied medicine, sociology, and cinematography, because apparently astrophysics was already taken up. And then he went into publishing, became a writer and an editor, and his publishing house, and in his role as writer, had an incredibly eclectic career, including 2 biographies of Groucho Marx, and an encyclopedia of Danish comics, which is still considered the Bible of comic books in Denmark. He launched his fiction career in 1997 with, I knew I was going to forget the second word, The Alphabet House, and I did. It's a World War II thriller, but in 2007 he launched the career that I'm sure that you know him as, which is the author of the Department Q series. We'll talk a little bit that. I really don't need to introduce it to you. I'm sure you probably know as much about it as I do. But I believe that the true distinction of a crime writer, something that he has to do, is he has to create a unique and compelling hero and place him in an unforgettable world. And I think that Jussi Adler-Olsen has done this brilliantly. I don't know of a hero I've come across in a crime novel who is more bilious, unfriendly, friendless, caustic as Karl Mork. And yet, it also made me realize, as I was realizing this, that the will to justice is very often the same thing as a certain sense of alienation. That no one can pursue justice as relentlessly as Karl does if he's an insider. Because he'll have to play the game. And Karl, of course, if you know the books, refuses to play the game. And the Department Q itself is such a wonderful creation. It is like a number of other situations we've seen recently. This is sort of the cold case group, but in those there's always a bit of glamour to it. Karl is put down in the basement. He gets no funds. His only staff are 2 people who are almost volunteers and make his life miserable. Of course, everybody makes his life miserable because that's the way Karl is. But it's because of that, and in spite of all of that, that Karl just refuses to fail. And it is one of the, it's just something that once you start these books, they're absolutely addictive. They remind me a great deal of John Harvey's books. Something that the minute you're done with one, you just got to say, what about the next one? And what about the next one? Because that world is so compelling. So, and it also, this most recent book had one of my favorite lines of any book I've read, certainly in the last year, which is, if you're going to piss on somebody, make sure the wind is behind you. So, with that...
Everyone knows that.
Yes, well, everyone thinks they know it. They don't always act as though they do. I'm going to read the prologue to this new novel, just to give you a taste of what it's about. And I'm doing this for his publisher, because they wanted me to. But I'm certain that we'll have a great deal to talk about in just a second, too. But this is such an incredible opening that I think is really worth reading. If I can just get my hands to work. There we are. It was the 3rd morning, and the smell of tar. Is this even on? I usually have, usually my voice projects, so I'm not too worried about it. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. It was the 3rd morning, and the smell of tar and seaweed had got into his clothes. Under the boathouse floor, the mush of ice lapped soundlessly against the wooden stilts and awakened memories of days when everything had been all right. He lifted his upper body from the bedding of waste paper and pulled himself sufficiently upright to to make out his younger brother's face, which even in sleep seemed tormented, chilled to the bone. Soon he would wake and glance around in panic. He would feel the leather straps tight on his wrists and waist and hear the jangle of the chain that constrained him. He would see the snowstorm and the light as it struggled to penetrate the tarred timber planks. And then he would start to pray. Countless times he'd seen desperation in his brother's eyes. Through the gaffer tape that covered his mouth came the repeated sound of his muffled pleas that Jehovah have mercy upon them. Yet both of them knew that Jehovah no longer paid heed, for blood had passed their lips. Blood that their jailer had let drip into their cups, the cups from which he had allowed them to drink before revealing to them what they had contained. They had drunk water, but in the water was blood, so forbidden, and now they were damned forever. For that reason, shame pierced even deeper than thirst. What do you think he'll do to us? His brother's frightened eyes seemed to ask. But how could he ever know the answer? All he knew instinctively was that it would all soon be over. He leaned back and scanned the room once again in the dim light, allowing his gaze to pass across the color beams and through the formations of cobwebs, noting each and every projection, each and every knot. The worn paddles and oars that hung from the apex of the ceiling, the rotten fishing nets that had long since made their last catch. And then he discovered the bottle. A gleam of sunlight played momentarily on the blue-white glass to dazzle him. So near, and yet so hard to reach. It was just behind him, wedged between the thick, rough-hewn planks of the floor. He stuck his fingers through the gap and tried to prise the bottle upward by the neck, but the air froze upon his skin. When the thing came loose, he could smash it and use the shards to cut through the strap that kept his hands tied tight behind his back. And when it succumbed, his numb fingers would find the buckle at his spine. He would loosen it, tear the tape from his mouth, remove the straps from around his waist and thighs, and as soon as the chain that was fastened to the leather strap at his waist no longer held him back, he would lunge forward and free his brother. He would draw him toward him and hold him tight until their bodies ceased to tremble. Then, he imagined, he would use all his strength to gouge into the timber around the door with the broken glass. He would see if he could hollow out the planks to which the hinges were fixed. And if the worst had happened and the car came before he was finished, he would lie in wait for the man. He would stand poised behind the door with the broken glass in his hand. That was what he told himself he would do. He leaned forward, folding his freezing fingers behind his back, and prayed for forgiveness for his wicked thought. Then he scraped again in the space between the planks to try to free the bottle. He scraped and scratched until the neck angled enough for him to grab hold of it. He listened. What was that, an engine? Yes, it was. The powerful engine of a large car. But was it approaching or simply passing by in the distance out there? For a moment, the low, deep sound seemed to get louder. He began to pull so desperately the neck of the bottle that his knuckles cracked audibly. But then the sound died away. Had it been the wind turbines, rumbling and whirring? Maybe it was something else entirely. He had no idea. He expelled warm breath from his nostrils. It steamed the air around his face. He wasn't so afraid anymore, not now. As long as he thought about the grace of Jehovah, he felt better. He pressed his lips together and labored on, and when finally the bottle came free, he struck it so hard against the timber of the floor that his brother lifted his head with a startled jolt and looked around in terror. Again and again he brought the bottle down against the floor. It was hard to get purchase with his hands behind his back. Too hard. Eventually, when his fingers were no longer able to maintain their grip, he let the bottle slide from his hand, turned himself around, and stared emptily at it as dust gently descended from the beams through the cramped space. He couldn't break it. He simply wasn't able. A pathetic little bottle. Was it because they had drunk blood? Had Jehovah abandoned them? He looked at his brother, who rolled himself slowly into his blanket and fell back onto his bedding. He was silent, not even attempting to mumble a word through the tape that sealed his lips. It took a while to gather the things he needed. The hardest part was stretching himself, confined by his chain, to reach the tar between the roofing planks with the tips of his fingers. Everything else was at hand. The bottle, the sharp sliver of wood from the timbered floor, the paper on which he was sitting. He pushed off one of his shoes and stabbed so sharply at his wrist with the wood that tears welled in his eyes. He let the blood drip onto his polished shoe for a minute, perhaps two. Then he tore a large sheet of paper from his bedding, dipped the splinter in his blood, and twisted his body, pulling at his chain until he was able to see what he was writing behind his back. As best he could, and in the smallest handwriting, he put down in words what was happening to them. When he had finished, he signed the letter with his name, rolled up the paper, and stuffed it inside the bottle. He allowed himself plenty of time to press the lump of tar down into the neck. He shifted his weight so as to see better, and checked and double-checked to make sure it was well done. When finally there was no more to do, he heard the dull sound of a car engine. This time, there was no mistake. He cast a pained glance at his little brother and stretched with all his might toward the light that seeped in through a broad crack in the timbered wall, the only opening through which the bottle would be able to pass. Then the door was opened, and a thick shadow entered amid a flurry of white snow. Silence. And then the plop. The bottle was released. So another tedious, slow, uninteresting beginning. Very nicely, we might get Jussi to read that in Danish.
Not the whole stuff. No.
All right.
Well done, David.
Well, thank you so much.
It's very, very scary in English. I hate books like that. Using kids, as victims. I really don't do it. Simply, it's only the beginning. This is the Danish book. It's called, in Danish, it's called A Message in a Bottle from P. And then of course, what it's all about. What's the name? And it's a conspiracy.
It's a conspiracy of faith.
Well, not bad anyway. So only a little, sample of the very, very fantastic, nice Danish language. The real German in the world without the grammar. A lot of English words too, if you really listen carefully. But you can't, not the way I'm reading aloud. Det var den 3. morgen, og lugten af tjære og tang var begyndt at klæbe til tøjet. Under bådehusets gulv skvulpede iskrøden stille. You can hear A and Ø and O and so forth. Letters that doesn't exist in English. Wonderful old-fashioned letters. Så under bådehusets gulv skvulpede iskrøden stille mod bundpælene og vækkede minder om dage, hvor alt var godt. Han løftede sin overkrop for lejet af papiraffald og trak sig så meget fremover, at han kunne skimte sin lillebrors ansigt, der selv i søvnen så forpint for frossent ud. Any dames here? Really? Hej med dig.
Hi.
Am I doing well?
Yes.
You can understand what I'm saying? Okay, that's fine. Om lidt ville han vågne og se sig forvildet om. Mærke læderremmene stramme om håndled og liv. Høre raslet fra den kæde, der holdt ham fast. Se snefoget og lyset kæmpe for at trænge ind mellem de tjærede brædder. Og så ville han begynde at bede. That's Danish. Thank you.
So, now here comes the Q&A. We were talking before this began, and the thing I love so much about this book is the villain. And that you have made a very human, understandable man be one of the most terrifying presences in a book that I've read in a long while. Sort of reminded me of Freddie Clegg from The Collector by John Fowles. The person who has a totally self-contained justification for everything he does, and because of that,
Most
Justice
people
terrifying. Yeah, and I was wondering, but he comes from a religious background that I found really, I was unaware the extent to which these sort of small sects exist in Denmark. The villainist was raised within and now preys upon small, very fundamentalist and very self-contained religious sects. How did that idea come to you?
Well, it's not really about religion and sex, because all of my books are about misuse of power. Misuse of power, you can see it everywhere, in the family, amongst friends, at the jobs, you know. Misuse of power, I hate, I loathe it. I like power, in fact, if it's well done. If it's well done. iPhone. I like power if it's well done, I mean, but it's so very seldom. So it's all about misuse of power and not specific sex. And many of those sects here in this book is just invented. I don't want to kick at any one specific places. So.
Well, the mother church in particular, the one that seems to be at the center of this, I kind of got a sense that, well, this is a really interesting creation.
Yeah, it's called the Father Church in Denmark.
Ah, okay.
Oh, that's wise, yeah.
And, so misuse of power was sort of, is the theme that sort of drives the books. But in this particular one you chose, and it really isn't so much about the church as about the family and about that the religion grants the father a kind of authority that is so easily abused, and which your villain then decides he's going to turn it against.
Absolutely.
And
you're so right.
Yeah.
So right, yeah.
Well, and again, I mean, was there any experience, any case, or was this just something which, upon thinking about these kind of groups or encountering them, that you sort of said, you know, there's a story here?
Yeah, but you know, you can also see the same stuff happening in big companies like Apple Company or IBM, Microsoft, that you can use the power outside the world, to the outside of the world, and also inside. But the real theme is actually to take the power and use it against the big company here, which is the sect. And what was your question?
Oh, it's okay. You're doing fine. I was just wondering if that so it seems that the story was more inspired by theme than any particular story.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're right.
It wasn't like a little news clipping you went, oh, you didn't store it away in a story file and say, I'm going to come back to this.
No. It was inspired by so many things, actually. Well, my aim was perhaps to just make this the third chapter of the long run.
Yeah.
Because this is, the real story is 10 books, you know.
Really?
Yeah, sort of. Maybe 10 books and 3 chapters. Then the 3 chapters will reveal all the secrets, and it must cost $100, you know, or 2 maybe. But I needed, for this chapter, I needed some pace, some speed, some chases, something that wasn't there in number 2 and will not be in number 4 and 5. I already wrote 5 of them. I knew the whole story, I knew the storyline, where we are on the dramatic curve, because in chapter 3 you can't be up there, right? You can be here, and the next one here, and then up again, and then the climax in number 10, the firework will come. So the inspiration was, in fact, where am I on the dramatic curve, on the longest detective story ever made in the world, where plots are mixing all and blending together. And then I knew the story from the very start of Carl and Assad and Rose.
All 10?
Yeah, all 10. I made it. That was the first synopsis I made.
Wow.
So the cases are not that important. The case of number 1, the keeper of the lost causes, should be simple. The woman in the cage, you know, the pressure chamber. I needed to make the platform for 3 persons in the cellar down there. Number 2 could be a little more harsh and violent, because then you could see the borderlines of the violence in the whole series. Can't do it in number 1, because then you're gone. Can't do it in number 3, because then you think I'm trying to walk on water. So number 2, and you know, this is an experiment every time you are doing a longer series like this. So this was actually my inspiration, to be there on the dramatic curve. How can you do that? By making a chase. How can you make a good chase by making normal persons being haunted
Right.
throughout in history, in the long run and in the short run.
I'm still just back at you actually planned out all 10 books
Yes,
at
sure
once.
I did.
That's jaw-dropping. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and I know the ending, and I am the only one. But it's in the safe, we know. Yeah, so you can make the rest, David.
Oh.
You have the skillness. So if I'm making a Stieg Larsson, he's the one.
I'm puzzled, but I mentioned something about Carl. There is something about Carl which I'm fascinated now to realize this is a 10-book arc, because I don't know how Carl could get any more isolated, but there's some wonderful twists to his supposed friendships in this. Here's the problem about talking about a book like this, is I want to talk about the book, but I can't give it away to you.
Oh,
And so I won't.
Oh, yeah.
But trust me, you're going to want it, and you'll want to read it. But
Let's talk about something different.
Well, why crime? Why? I mean, you had your first book was a sort of a historical thriller, World War II. So
Really?
you might say the action genre, sort of appealed to you. But why crime? And in particular, why this long format of crime? What was it about it that
First of all, this is not a crime story. This is a thriller. This is right pronounced.
thriller? Yeah.
Thriller. Okay, this is a thriller. And what's the difference? I mean, in the crime story, you have a crime and you're going to solve it, and that's it. Pow. We have it from the old Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, and so forth. That's all about the first crime. A thriller is about preventing a crime to happen in the end. So that's like the classical ones, like the Victor Hugo, like Alexandre Dumas, the Count of Monte Cristo. What will happen in the end? Will he know why he was imprisoned and who actually stood behind that deed? So, and that's the stories I like, not the crime stories really. So this is a thriller. And with all the tricks of a thriller, like suspense, point of views, and so forth. You can be in the head of Karl Merck, not in the head of Assad. This is important, and Rose, which appears for the first time in number 2. So, and you ask me why I made a crime. Making a thriller in like the old classical one makes you able to write about every subject, every topic in the world, mixing them, blending them, social, political aspects, romance even, humor. And crime story and humor doesn't fit well altogether.
Really?
No. Where is it?
Well,
tell me, have you ever read one?
Well, yes.
Funny crime story?
Well, not funny, but I said without humor, because if you know any cops, and I hang out with a lot of cops.
I know.
Yeah, humor gets you through the day.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you begin to drink and you begin to
True.
act out. I mean, there's when all you're seeing is the bad. You've got to develop some type of coping mechanism. And I've got a couple of cop friends who are the funniest human beings I know.
Still alive?
Yeah. Well,
good for them.
yeah. Though we lost one this past year, and that's where I'm going with the next book. But it's you touched on something I think is really important. Is that what I mean by the crime story is really the story about the individual who refuses to be who society says he has to be. And that can be for the good or it can be for the ill. But it's always that tension between the individual and society. And again, that always speaks to power again. And I think the crime story is just tailor-made for that story.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be an individual within this society at this time?
But you very often smash a super tanker in the crime story. Or kill 10,000 statists. So I wanted to be free, simply. For all the classical cliches of crime stories. There are a lot of cliches in my books, certainly, I know that. The skeleton in itself is a cliche. But the series started that way, that I made 3 international political stories, thriller stories, and I could live from that. It was fantastic. Then I was phoned up by a Danish producer the one who's making a lot of Swedish movies, and he told me, I'm so fed up by the Swedes, so couldn't we make a Danish crime story and not like the Sjöwall and Valö fake stories? Just help me out here. And I asked him, do you want me to make a police story where you only can act within certain regions and with certain jobs? I want to be free, simply. I can see you're interested, but I wasn't interested at all.
No. What I find, I'm interested by how you sat there and said, I get what you want me to try me to do, and I was just comparing it to what I read, which is yes, your ability to break out into the other point of view characters, your refusal to be stuck inside the whole police procedural framework is what makes this book expand into something so much more than just a cop story.
Yeah, and I had to think out, what's the solution? The producer, he was right, I was interested. It could be funny though to write about Danish topics with Danish persons. I never did, and they hated me for that, the Danes. So especially the reviewers, 600 pages going on in America. So I tried to do that, and inventing a person that actually only wanted to be sacked from his job. So therefore, they placed him down in the cellar, hoping him to go by himself. But there he was, He could be lazy, like I would like to be. He could smoke 20 cigarettes a day, which I don't do anymore, unfortunately. So I allowed him to sit there and being lazy for a certain period, until I didn't allow it anymore. Bringing in the sidekick, Assad.
That's the perfect part.
Thank you. And he's not the sidekick really. Who's Watson, who's Sherlock Holmes here? So, and the interaction between those two persons made this series vivid for me to write.
Well, I was going to say that there was the one character that manages somehow to refuse to be repelled by Carl's acidic temperament is Assad. And it doesn't matter what he gets thrown at him, Assad refuses, I know what you're trying to do, but I won't let you. And even when Carl says, I know where you live now, I know where you're lying, I'm sorry, I'm giving some things away, but Assad just says, Carl, just stop. And
you know what, Carl hates me for that.
Yeah.
Bring Assad out of my life, please.
But that's just it. When looking at the other friendships, I realized there's something about Assad that is so fundamentally, for lack of a better word, forgiving or insightful that he won't fall for Carl's natural instinct to just push everybody away. Assad just won't. He's like those mines that attach themselves to the hull of the ship and then blow up when they decide to. And I get the feeling that relationship, now that I've realized you're doing 10 books, I just can't wait to see how that develops. Rose, on the other hand, is a real piece of work.
Yeah.
Where did she come from?
Well, I knew when you're having a sidekick, there would be some problems with the interaction after a while.
Yeah.
It will always be stereotypically. So I needed chaos. That's the answer.
Yeah.
She's so chaotic. So bringing in the story makes the numbers of interactions, endless. They can, and there are secrets too in all three persons' lives. So being secretive gives a lot of possibilities.
Oh no, dude, whenever I tell my students, I said the two most important things to give a character are secrets and contradictions.
Yeah.
Once you have, give those, you have all sorts of places to go with a character.
But it's difficult to have a lot of secrets when you're in the head of a person. He should think sometime, well, I did that and that. He's not doing that because he forgot it. Okay, that's the one big element in him. Later on, we'll find out what he forgot.
Wow.
Good and evil in all three persons. I can tell you, maybe it will end okay in the end. I can't say, but I know. But good and evil. I was brought up in the mental hospital, And Carl, that's I too, because my real name is Carl Valdemar Jussi Henry Adler-Olsen. I'm sorry to say. So Carl, that's a nice part of Karl Mørck. The sweet, intelligent, and humorous part coming from me. Mørck means dark, really, but it's a real Danish name. And the guy Mørck I met in 1956. I'm 62 years old now. So I was 6 years old. This was the second year of mine in 2 different mental hospitals. The first mental hospital in 55 didn't have psychopharmaca. That means the tablets where you can being brought back to life, normal life. But we had that in 56. And suddenly I could meet the insane patients that spitted on me and tried to scratch me the year before openly and discuss with them. And I had a good friend, he was Mørck. Mørck killed his wife. And I was, scared by that and asked my father, what? And my father said, well, you see, take it easy, it's okay now. But they fought like dog and cat for many years. And well, he won in the end. That was not so dramatic. So I realized this fantastic person that brought us food every day from the central kitchen and even gave me a little kitten. He was nice and evil at the same time. Good and evil in one person, we all have.
Well, now, you and I talked about this before we came on. That type of moral shading, that ability to show the ambiguity in the human heart, seems to be something that I think European crime fiction, and European fiction in general, embraces far more than the almost Manichaean view that you get in America. I mean, we love to read it as long as you guys write it. But if an American tries to portray...
That's not good for David.
Yeah, well, no, I'm one of the highly respected...
I'll give you a good Scandinavian name, right?
Well, I have an Irish name, and the Vikings invaded Ireland, so I'm close.
Sorry.
I'm real close.
Sorry. Do you know why we actually did that? Just to keep warm. We couldn't...
See, that's why we drank. I'll tell you what, why don't we open up to the audience? And if anybody has questions, I'm sure that Jussi would like to answer your questions, not just mine.
Well, it's not a question, I guess it is. The third part, which is the paralyzed fellow officer.
Yeah, Hardy.
Yeah, Hardy. Yeah. How did you come upon that? What were you
I
thinking?
saw Hardy in real life. I did. My parents had a paralyzed person, and as a friend in the family, and I loved him so dearly. He actually survived for many, many years. 25 years he just laid there, So Hardy is a sort of a real person. But I was phoned up by a physiotherapist. Is that the
physical therapist?
Yeah.
I'll try to throw as many induce TH words out of you. I'm getting a real kick out of watching you try to pronounce them.
Yeah, thank you. Well, she phoned me a year ago, and she said to me, please, you see, this can't happen anymore. A person being paralyzed and lying in the same bed in a private home for several years without having any help, impossible. So I said, help me out. Do something for me and Hardy, please. So she made a team with doctors and everyone trying to cope. How in the world can we get this person sit a little up? So this is Hardy, and Hardy is very important for Carl. Later on, Hardy will help him, I'm sure, to drag the secrets out of him a little, and helping out in solving some crimes.
Well, secondary characters are always there, like little gravitational moons to draw the tide of a character somewhere this way or that way. And I thought Hardy without Hardy, there was an aspect of Mørck I just didn't get. And watching his devotion to him, also realizing some of it's inspired by guilt, was such a morally complex, emotionally complex, and yet touching relationship. It was his relationship with Hardy and his relationship with Assad, both in this book, I just found fascinating. I agree. This is not really a crime story. This is a story about character, and just a very compelling one. Anyway, I'm yammering again. Back here.
I was curious, how many languages has this been translated into? And
Yeah.
Is that difficult for you, or to
No, because I'm not doing the job, you know.
Yeah, have you reading the other languages?
Well, some of those I can read.
Yeah,
I'm not that good in Armenian,
yeah.
for
But when
instance.
you read them, do you find, is it
Something
different?
is taken away and something is given to the story. But you're very depending on the translator you are working with. The English version is being translated by a couple of translators and then a friend of mine who is American and has lived for many, many years in Denmark. Very nice person. I can tell you, he inspired me doing a SAT. I phoned him. His name is Stephen Shine. He's living on a small island in Denmark. And I phoned him and I said, you know, Stephen, we haven't seen each other for a long period. And I'm missing you. I'm very, very often thinking of you. And he said, wow, that's a coincidence. I'm always also thinking about me. Okay. So this inspired me for a SAT, you know, that was quite unexpected, right? And intelligent. So put on this very sentence a little moustache, then you have a SAT. But then he said something more. He said, I asked him, well, by the way, how are you, Steve? Well, I'm quite well, you know, but I think it will pass. So, what was the question, David? I'm sorry.
Languages.
Languages. 38 languages. And that means that if you're giving away, for instance, English to all the English-spoken countries, we are up to 124 countries now. So this is quite good. That means all the European countries and you know, Africa is a little weak, I'm sorry to say, but it's quite good. And in Central Europe, it's amazing what's happening now, especially in Germany, where I'm selling over 1.3 million copies per book, because I found something in, you know, the way the Germans are really. They are quite formal at the outside. Herr, see, you know, Herr Doktor and Herr Professor and so forth. Even though that we are well acquainted for 20 years, I say Herr David. So, but in the inside, I realized they are just Danes in disguise. And reading me, you know, and the humor of mine opened them up quite. So I'm so popular of that, for that reason.
Go ahead.
So you've got these 10 books hiding, waiting to be revealed.
Yeah.
And they're going to be revealed over a series of years, I take it, not all
Well,
years.
yes.
So between now, when apparently I guess they're all finished, and the time that they're
I only made 5. I'm on number 6 now.
Okay. Time's going to elapse, and you're going to change, I assume. And so if you have a concept that these are going to be 10 books, and I assume that you have sort of an idea of where they're going to go.
Absolutely.
How, you sound so absolute.
Yes, sure.
But you will change. And so
I will.
have you built this into how they're going to progress, or do you just say, no, this is going to be the next book, this is the next book,
One can never tell, right?
That's what I want to hear.
But I'm quite confident in what I planned will be written. But of course the cases can change. I made one story and the synopsis of one case for number 2 about refugees from Germany in Denmark. It's a very sad story because we treated them badly. They came there to have a little rest, you know, women and children and old people, and we never took any care of them. They died like flies, you know. 18,000 died there until from the period from 45 to 48. That's a shame, really. And I made the story, and it was clearly like the Sophie's Choice, a good, nice story. And then another author in Denmark made something like that. Not so good, but anyway, gone. Right. So I have 9 cases I can put into 5 books. So I can choose. But maybe tomorrow something new will happen that's more convenient for the whole story. And that will of course change also the first story in the novel. I know. But you are talking about my personal changes. How will it interfere? I don't know. In my opinion, I haven't changed for many years. I mean, being an author and having the success and stuff, I'm still the same person. I'm like Karl Marx, you know. I'm just telling things right up. And I learned that from Bill Gaines. Do you know who Bill Gaines is?
I'm sorry.
William H. Gaines.
Oh, yeah.
Mad magazine. Mr. Alfred E. Neumann himself was a friend of mine. I was a publisher and I published Mad magazine in Denmark and in other countries in northern part. And he came and visited me and he said, please always remember what the shadow knows by Sergio Aragon. It's the small ones at the side in the Mad magazine where you and I are discussing and being nice to each other, but in reality, on the shadow, on the wall, we are stabbing each other and hating each other like hell, you know? And that's kind of work. And I was like that also. I'm so frank, you know. So I don't think I will change.
I don't mean so much you, but the world will change, events will change.
Yeah. Little thing happened, you know. The guy here is called Hafez El-Assad. Something happened in Syria. It's not very practical anymore with this name. So in Frankfurt Book Fair, 2 big persons from Egypt came to me, and I was a little scared of them, you know, putting me in the middle like a sandwich. And then I asked them, oh, what's going on here? And they said, well, we want to discuss with you if we can publish this in Egypt. Oh, that's fine. So, and
I have no problem with that. Immediately.
and I said, well, there's only one problem. Thinking of the situation in Syria nowadays, you could call him something else, but Hafez El-Assad. And they said, oh, we already thought of that. We'll call him Mubarak. They did. Yeah. They have some humor in Egypt also.
Well, you might want a different publisher.
Well,
And if you tour in Egypt, I'd pick a very well armored car.
thank you.
Yes.
So
Anybody
let's see
else?
what happens. It's very interesting question.
I'm curious about how you began in the writing.
Yeah.
Did you start with the desire to have a 10-story thing that would hold together and have an ending? Or did you write 1 or 2 and start thinking, gee, this would be fun if it grew?
Yeah.
What was your initial goal?
My initial goal was to make the longest detective story ever made in the history of the world.
Exactly.
It was, in fact, yes.
And then did you outline each one
Yeah.
to get yourself there?
Hmm?
Interesting.
I'm
Yeah,
stunned by
I
this.
agree.
I find
Why
it
write one
fascinating.
book when you can write 10?
Well, but also just, I mean, that takes stones, as we say. I'm going to write the longest detective story that's ever been written. Try and stop me.
Yeah.
Try and stop it. And yet also because you're saying, but I'm not going to be constrained by the entire detective cliche. I'm not going to be constrained by the police procedural nonsense. I mean, this is going to be a detective story, but it's about the detective, not about the crimes. The crimes are almost incidental. I find that just intriguing as hell.
Yeah.
And I love that.
And number 4, it's more classical. It's like anecdotes being put together. Number 5 is about, well, I was so amazed, you know. I'm not reading crime stories and thriller stories these days. I haven't done that for 10 years now. I don't dare to do it. I don't dare to be influenced by David's language and plot making and so forth. So I'm reading other stuff. And I can't remember what I was going to tell.
Well, we're just talking about the whole notion of with this. You were writing the longest detective story,
Yeah.
but it wasn't really about the crimes. It was about the detective as the center of it.
Yeah.
And I've lost my train of thought as well. So anyway, and the question.
What was it
yes, there we
talking
go.
about?
What are you reading now?
Oh, I'm reading absurd literature, simply. Non-fiction literature, which is fictional. Like the Norwegian author of Erlend Loe, who is always discussing with himself. Well, the guy, he saw the moose, and the moose was, oh, by the way, now it's the author speaking and not the guy in the book. I come to think of, I mean, literature like that. I love the old ones like Arabal, Harold Pinter, and guys like that. And then I have the classical ones. I can turn to them. My favorite of them all, Mr. John Steinbeck. Can't be better. And now I can remember what I was going to say before. So not reading other crime stories make me think that I'm original, right? And then number 5 I made called the Marco Effect. And in the reviews in Europe, they are
Is that
writing.
already out?
Yes,
In
it is.
Denmark, yeah.
In Denmark and in some other countries.
But they're not translated yet?
No.
No.
And then I've been reading a lot of reviews, and there it is like, this is an Oliver Twist. And I was amazed, because Oliver Twist is, in fact, my favorite novel of them all, I guess. Made by Dickens, one of the good ones, right? They were right. And even though I haven't been reading this for 25 years, it's in the back of my head and inspired me to do this story about a boy in the society, having lots of enemies, stealing a lot here and there, and even the faking is in this story of mine. It's shameful. Shameful.
Well, I mean, Dickens stole it from the medieval morality plays.
Thank you.
Oliver is every man, except he's 8 years old. And that's why he's the most boring character in that book.
Yeah, he's quite boring, but Marco is quite differently.
I have a lot of questions, but I'm curious what brought you here. We're so honored to have you. Are you on a tour with your book? Or?
I had to see hate.
Really?
Simply, I saw the house of Jimi Hendrix today. I bought a guitar just in the store, so no, I was brought here by my publishing house.
Oh.
And they asked me to go to 5 cities in the United States within 5 days. And I said to them, I'm not a Japanese tourist. I want to be here and there for 2 days, please. So let me see really and live here, because I haven't been in San Francisco before.
Really?
And this is the 3rd day, isn't it? Yeah. The 3rd day, and it was exactly as I expected. Amazing. Also this surrounding. So Seattle, Houston, Minneapolis, New York.
Houston.
I've been in America a few times before, but never that far west. So this is fantastic, simply. But I must admit, don't tell to the publisher, but I'm so tired of traveling. This is like holiday for me. Last year I traveled 120 days, and the year before the same. And that, if I'm publishing 1 book a year, I'm in a hurry, I can tell you, the rest of the year. And sometimes my wife, who's helping me, actually, I have an office house where I have some assistants just helping me in I don't know what, asking me, please, this period of the year, maybe you are not able to say hello, but what about next year in May?
Yeah,
Why did I become an author? I can ask you the same. I became an author just to gain time, to have a lot of time for my friends and my kid. He was 5 years old at that period. And I got it, really. I could play the guitar, I could write in my pajamas. I could, I could leave the writing and play some football. Anything was possible for a few years. And then I swapped the time for success. Never do that. And I really mean it. Never do that. I miss my time so much. So I'm trying to come back to reality and what I really want from my life. So next year I'm not traveling that much, I'm sure. I will not.
Well, we'll all come to Denmark.
Sorry?
We'll all come to Denmark.
Come, come, come. We have room for 30 persons.
Anything else? Or would you like to get your book signed? Would that be about time for that? Well, great. Why don't we thank you all.